Welcome to Dialogue, the interview podcast where I kill the small talk with the leading voices in crime, culture, and justice. I'm your host, Rebecca Sebastian, and I am so happy to be back with you after a couple weeks off. I took one off to recover from CrimeCon, and I took another off to recover from COVID. And I will let you guess which one was more fun. I just couldn't put new episodes out during that time, so we had a couple super fun replays with Patrick Hines and Justin Evans, who I got to connect with at CrimeCon. And I am now fully recovered. I have my voice back. I have most of my energy back, and I am just so happy to be recording. And speaking of CrimeCon, the next series is going to be called Crime Conversations, also known as interviews with people I met at CrimeCon. I'm really excited about sharing these with you, and the first one up to date is a result of one of my favorite things that happened at CrimeCon. There were a lot of great things that happened, and I'm eventually going to tell you all of them, but this was top 3. Okay, so indulge me in a little story time. It's Saturday night at CrimeCon weekend in Las Vegas, and there was an event called the Clue Awards. This was a first ever event at CrimeCon, and it was basically like, I'll explain it briefly. This isn't entirely accurate, but like the Oscars for true crime. So people nominated podcasts, documentaries, books, TV shows, etc., who were doing great work. And there was a panel of judges, and there were winners, and there was like a formal dinner celebrating it. And it was a private event, so it was sort of an additional event not everybody at CrimeCon went to. And I was one of the judges, and so I'd done my work on judging on the panel prior to the event, right? So I had listened to podcasts, put in my votes, and I was just there to attend and watch the evening's events, which was hosted by Dan Abrams. And I got seated at my table, and I didn't know anybody there. And we all were just going around saying our name and where we were from. And the woman across from me on the table said, "I'm Susan, and I'm from Galveston, Texas." And I said, "Well, I can't hear Galveston and not think of Bob Durst." And of course, the table laughed because we're all simpatico, because it's CrimeCon. And she said, "Well, I was the judge who presided over his 2003 trial for the murder of Morris Black." Friends, you could have knocked me over with a feather, because I have wanted a judge on the podcast for almost 3 years, which is how long this show has existed. I've never talked to a judge. And 2, she presided over one of the most iconic cases and people in true crime. So basically, the whole night was a blur. I just became hell-bent on getting Susan on the podcast. We chatted. She seemed very open, and I made good on my promise. I don't think Susan thought I would be just as persistent as I was, but I was emailing her within days saying, "So when can we record for Dialogue?" And I am so happy to announce that Susan Criss, the judge from that trial, is our guest today. So we made it happen. Susan Criss is here, and she's a lauded defense attorney right now. But prior to that, as I mentioned, she was a judge in Galveston, Texas. Before that, a prosecutor. So as if getting some tea on Bob Durst wasn't enough, we're also getting a guest with a 360-degree view of our criminal justice system. I couldn't be happier. I love how this worked out. So without further ado, I'm going to play a brief clip of Susan during the 2003 trial. This is lifted from the HBO documentary, The Jinx. Then we'll go right into the conversation. Susan, thank you so much for killing the small talk.
Mr. Foreman, I understand you have a verdict.
Yes, Your Honor.
Will you hand it to the bailiff? Will the defendant please rise? For the verdict of the jury is such: will the jury find the defendant, Robert Durst, not guilty?
Susan, welcome to Dialogue Podcast. I'm very excited to talk to you today.
Well, glad to be here.
I'm just thinking about the serendipity of us sitting next to each other, or across from each other, I should say, at the Clue Awards at CrimeCon. I'm sure I was way more than you bargained for when you went to dinner that night. We are sitting at this table at CrimeCon, I think we're just small talking. Everyone's saying where they're from. And you say Galveston. And I can't think of anything but Bob Durst when I hear Galveston. And that's how we made our connection. So you, of course, were the judge who presided over his first murder trial in 2003. And two things happened. I've always wanted a judge on dialogue. So that was so thrilling. And then to have one in such an iconic case around such a enigmatic figure of true crime was thrilling. So then I learned you were a prosecutor prior to being a judge, and you're currently a criminal defense attorney. So walk me through your career, just starting out as a prosecutor and the evolution to each of those roles.
Well, I started off as a prosecutor in Galveston. I was an assistant DA for almost 10 years, and I specialized in child abuse prosecution back when that was a new thing to specialize in.
Wow.
So then I left that office, and I was in private practice as a defense attorney for 3 years. And the judicial position came up. So in Texas, we run for judgeships. So I ran for it. I won the primary without a runoff, and then I won, and I was a district court judge for 15 years. And my bench was half civil and half criminal, and I had big cases in both of them. I did the Robert Durst case. I did the British petroleum explosion cases at the refinery where over 10 people were killed. Wow. And thousands hurt. And so then after that, I went back into private practice, and I have been in private practice for, I think I'm in my 8th year of that. So I've gotten to, I think being a judge makes me a better lawyer, and being a prosecutor and a defense attorney made me a better judge.
This is fascinating to me because I feel like I've had prosecutors on and defense attorneys. Few have done both. And of course, everybody says, both sides, if you will, say they're after justice. That is the goal. But everybody also is trying to win a case, and you have done both, and you've been a judge. So this might be impossible to answer, but I'd be curious to hear your take on which role do you feel lends itself to the pursuit of justice? Can you even answer that?
Each role that I had, I felt I was more aligned at the time. And I promise you, each one of those type persons in those roles think that they're the good guy and everybody else is the bad guy. I promise you that. But I mean, they're all so important. I do think probably more so as a defense attorney because you're fighting against so much power. You're fighting for the little guy. But really, you are seeking justice in all three roles, just in different ways and under different rules.
Right. And do you look at it as winning? I mean, I know nobody likes to talk about that, but when you're prosecuting a case and when you're defending a client, surely you want to win the case. Was that top of mind, or was that kind of lower on the priority? How did you think about actual wins?
Well, it's human nature to want to win. And if you're in a trial, of course you want to win. But a prosecutor has an additional duty of seeking justice instead of winning. So sometimes it's their duty to dismiss a case or to lower it or to plea bargain it or to do something other than win. And that's hard. That's hard to do. And it can be frustrating, and it's a very difficult road to go. But everybody wants to win, especially if you're in the defense. But everybody wants to win, and sometimes nobody wins.
And winning can be subjective in these situations as well. Sometimes
the victory isn't the guilt or not guilty. Sometimes the victory is what the punishment was. Sometimes they may be making a lifetime offer and you get probation. That's a victory, even though they got a victory in the guilty, but the defense attorney gets a victory in the punishment sometimes.
Yeah, that's a great point. So I think the role of a judge is probably the one I know least about. When a case comes across your desk, when you're scheduled and slated for trial, how much time do you prepare researching the case, the brief that's given to you? Is it days, weeks, months?
Well, generally speaking, it's probably months between the time the case comes to you and the time that you hear it. But in the meantime, there's pretrial hearings and there's issues that you have to decide. So sometimes you might have heard everything and seen everything in the case before the jury comes in. And sometimes you might have seen nothing. You can't just research everything before you start. And even if you did, there's going to be surprises, especially in criminal law. But it just depends if you've had to do a lot of pretrial hearings on either issues of law or fact or motions to suppress, you might have heard everything before you start.
That's hitting on my next question, which is a judge's discretion in interpreting the law, right? It feels like that's where the judge's power lies. And I'm a big court TV person. I love watching a trial. I watch court TV the way people watch daytime talk shows. So I have seen what I think is a judge's influence shape a trial going in one way or another. Can you talk about that?
That's very tricky. And, I started off when I was a judge, I'd been a prosecutor, and a defense attorney, so I knew criminal law, but the civil part was new. What shocked me in the civil part was thinking, okay, this is Texas. We have a huge state and a very old state. So certainly everything that has been decided has already been decided before. So what was the case law before? And it shocked me how many times I would have a case where an issue would come up and they would say, oh, this has never been decided. How could that be? I mean, how could that be? But it was. And so, or like we have 14 courts of appeals. You might have had 6 courts decided one way and the other 6 decided something completely different. And you so which one do you go by? Okay. It isn't all black and white. It would be a lot easier as a judge if it were, and there were precedent that you could just always follow and that's it. But so many times you have to use your gut on deciding what you believe, who you believe. That's part of it. And part of it is deciding what the law is and whether things apply. And, a lot of judges favor the state because they're, that's the home team. And you really can't do that. You're supposed to go call by call. You can't decide, well, I kind of want this side to win, even though you might, as a human being, you might want one side to win or lose. You got to go each call by call. Sometimes you have to make a call that you yourself don't like. You're like, oh, I hate that I have to do this, but this is the right thing. And you have to do that and be true to yourself, or in the end, things can go very, very, very badly. But, a judge can put their thumb on the scale and that can have a huge influence.
Is that something you identified as a trait in yourself, the ability to do that way before you were a judge? Like, could you see that in yourself, that neutrality or objectivity as a kid or a young adult?
I guess I could, because when I was growing up, I would always worry about whether something was fair or not, And so that was always like, it's fair or it's not fair. And that was a big deal to me. But sometimes when you're making a call as a judge, you want to make the call that's fair, but that's not what the law is. The law isn't always fair. And so sometimes that's the harder part. So it is a challenge. And, you think, oh, of course I'm neutral, and everybody thinks that. And they don't realize until they get in there, that's a lot harder than it sounds.
Oh, I would be terrible. And I will be the first to admit it, is why I will not be a judge anytime soon, not to mention no law background or any qualifications. I have to ask, I've always said, if God forbid I get into any big trouble, I do not want a jury of 12. I want a bench trial. Can you talk about a bench trial? Would you do the same? And were you ever a judge in a bench trial where there was no jury?
I wasn't the judge in too many bench trials because people just didn't choose to go in front of me because I think they thought I was going to be harsher than I probably was. So an inmate one time said to another inmate when they were watching the Durst trial on TV, they were in federal prison in Georgia, and one of them said, "Oh, you know her? What is she like?" And the guy said, "Well, if you're innocent, you want to be in her court. But if you're not innocent, you don't want to be in her court," which I thought was the best compliment I could have ever gotten in my life,
It's a rave review, yes.
Yeah, it's like, and it was from an inmate, Okay, so that was really kind of nice. So, there's a variable in every case, and you think as a judge, sometimes I would think, I know pretty much how this is going to go. I know what I'm going to do. And then you get in there and somebody says something you never thought of, and you're like, oh, well, that just changes everything. And you have to be open to that. You have to realize that there are things that are going to change your mind, and you can't just be stuck on what your original thought was. And sometimes you're going to make a mistake. You cannot do this job and not make a mistake. And you have to realize, you know what? I think I need to redo that or rethink that. And it's better to do it early on as soon as you realize it than let things go up, because if you think you're never going to make a mistake and then it's all about your ego. And this is what people don't understand, even judges. It's not about you. It's not about you. And as a prosecutor, it's not about you. And as a defense attorney, it's not about you. And that's hard because to do any of those jobs, you have to have a very, very good ego.
I'm loving that you're saying this because wrongful convictions are a major conversation now. And there's so much more awareness that we have gotten this wrong before. And the lack of humility and the ability to go back and make sure these convictions are good is so much harder than in the moment doing what you're saying and course correcting. But what did that look like? Can you think of a time where you actually had to go, I've changed my mind. I'm coming back on another day in court?
I don't know that I didn't like come back and say, oh, I found somebody guilty and now I'm not finding them guilty. But there's a lot of calls that over time that I did find that I needed to change. And I had a good example of a judge that I practiced in front of who did correct himself. And sometimes I've ordered a new trial. And as a judge, you kind of hate to do that because you sort of feel like, okay, I put that in that we've done this column and and so that's done. And I'm completed that task and I've got other cases. And so you kind of don't want to go backward. But sometimes you do. And I have done that. And, human nature tells you, oh God, I don't want to do it. But sometimes you just have to do it. And it's better in the system if you do it early on than have somebody languish in prison for years and years.
Oh my God.
Have to.
Absolutely.
It costs more,
Yes. Yeah. Resources. Okay. So we've said his name a few times. Let's talk about the Durst trial. Let's get to why we're all here. I mentioned I watch court TV and love that there are cameras in the courtroom because they give lay people like me this window into our justice system that we don't otherwise have. How do you feel about them given your role? And were you happy there were cameras specifically during Robert Durst's trial? How did you feel about that?
I do think it's good. I think it's good for the public to see how it actually works, and then they can understand better. And I also love to watch as well, but I think it is good now. In our case, I only let them in during certain parts, and I really had a hard time with that. This was not that long after the OJ case, okay? And so back then, you're like, okay, well, is it good or is it bad? And and one thing I was a little bit concerned about was, how is it going to affect the witnesses? And, and I watched witnesses in the OJ trial who became celebrities and they became so obsessed with that themselves that in some instances it affected their performance. It was a performance and all that. So I really kind of struggled to want to kind of get it right back in a time when it was newer. And so you kind of had to put more rules on it. But I think it helps to have them there. I think it's a good thing.
The transparency.
Yes.
And so does the judge make the rules of the parameters of the media access? Is that who gets to decide that? Yeah,
actually. And some judges don't want them in there. Some judges don't like it. So there's a decision, number one, of whether to allow it. And then you also have to have rules. And one thing I was very lucky was our case was also not long after two very big cases in Houston, the Selena, the singer Selena, that murder trial. And then there was also the Andrea Yates case where Andrea Yates was mentally ill and she drowned 5 of her children. And those were very high profile cases. And so some of the reporters who had been in there, who were Associated Press reporters actually, came to me and gave me some pointers on things to think about. And they didn't tell me do this or don't do that, but they did advise me to come up with the rules ahead of time, so that everybody would know them and that they would be fair to all the media outlets and not to favor one over the other, which when you've got that many media people coming in there, it is just crazy. But you do want to do it in a thought out, fair kind of way. And they gave me a lot of ideas on how to set it up so that it didn't become what they call the circus.
A circus, yeah. And we have seen that. And I have to say, I watched the O.J. Simpson trial in real time when it was happening. And I don't remember the Robert Durst. For some reason, I'm sure it did have national interest. For me, it happened when I saw the Jinx. I went back and understood what it became. But was it national? Was the coverage massive?
Well, there was coverage. It wasn't like day to day like a lot of cases. New York Post, New York Times, People magazine. There were a lot of different entities there. But I think everybody thought this was a laydown. He's going to be found guilty. And then when he was found not guilty, then it was, magnified 1,000 times. And so I thought it was a lot before the verdict, but after the verdict, it just exploded.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of people were very surprised by that verdict. And before we get to your response on that, I have a thought on what I think went wrong. What do you think well, I guess we're burying the lead. Do you think that verdict was the right verdict?
Well, no. I mean, and you're not supposed to say that. You're not supposed to say that as a judge.
It's just between us.
I don't think the jury did get it right. I think there was evidence that they could have based a verdict of guilt on, but there could have been more. There was a lot more that didn't get presented that could have made it more certain. But there were a lot of dynamics going on, and I could see that it was not going to go well as the trial was going on. I was kind of hoping it'd be a hung jury so they could start over and maybe the state could kind of get their act together, but it didn't happen.
Whoa. So, okay, 2 follow-up questions. What was some of it evidence that we didn't know about, or what things were you seeing that could have moved the needle on the verdict? And 2, they charged him with first-degree murder, premeditated, and no lesser charges. So that's a high bar to set. Do you think that is what the jury couldn't get to?
I mean, that was a decision the lawyers didn't, none of the lawyers wanted a lesser. If they had, they would have gotten it. And the jury, whether it made a difference, I don't know. It's hard to say. A lot of people thought that would have made a difference, but I don't know if that would have actually made a difference. There was lots of things. One of the things that the jury didn't hear was when Robert Durst was in jail in Pennsylvania. He was on the run and he was captured at a grocery store in Pennsylvania. And he was in a jail cell there before he was extradited for a good while. And he loves to talk. He loves to talk. And he used every minute of every day that he could on the telephone. He called his friends. He called at the time, his wife, his second wife. He called his sister a little bit, and he talked to his lawyers. And what he would do is he talked to one person, then he'd call the next person and talk to them about what he talked to with the first person. Then he'd have a third conversation that would cover what he talked to in the second conversation and the first conversation, because he wanted to relive every, well, this is what so-and-so said. And this is what so-and-so said. So, I mean, he talked and talked and talked all day long. And he said, and there's a lot of things that were revealed in there that I think would have been bombshells in court, including that he'd had his friends sneak into the jail a tape recorder. And that back then, it was back in the day, we had tape recorders with cassette tapes.
Right.
We didn't have the stuff you have now. So that's what you used. So they smuggled that in, and he practiced his testimony. And then he smuggled the tapes out, and they would review them and decide, well, did that sound believable? Does he need to change his story? He had his wife go watch the Richard Gere movie. Can't remember the name of it. It's a Richard Gere movie that had Edward Norton in it. It was a great movie where the defense attorney was representing someone who killed a priest, and the defense was insanity, but the guy was faking the insanity.
Yes.
So he wanted his wife to watch that film because he wanted to base his defense on what was in that movie. Okay. So, I mean, there's just all sorts of things like that were in there that he's not saying I did it, but there are things that an innocent person wouldn't say.
And so that didn't make it in because it wasn't admissible for what reason?
No,
how come?
That's not what happened. The state, there were 40 hours of these conversations.
Okay.
And the state got them. They could have gotten them a long time ago, but I don't know why they got them at the last minute. They weren't going to get them, and then they changed their mind and they came. And I didn't know about them till the last minute. And the defense, I think, thought, well, they aren't going to do it, and then they're going to do it. So the defense didn't want them in, and the defense was claiming attorney-client privilege and spousal privilege and all sorts of things. So I had to listen to all of them to decide what would be admissible and not admissible. So I had to listen to 40 hours of him talking. And there was a tiny part that were conversations with his lawyers that I ruled were not admissible. There's a thing that's said on the tapes before he talks, reminding you this is recorded and this isn't private. But sometimes when he called his lawyers, he didn't call them directly. He called a friend or a family member who would call them. So it kind of gets diverted a little bit. And so I held that those were not. But like I said, if he had a conversation with his lawyers, he would then call his friend or his wife and say, oh, guess what I said to Dick? And this was Dick said. Then this is what Mike said. And this is what so-and-so said about what Dick said. And this is what so-and-so said. So even though that part was ruled inadmissible, there were other conversations where he had clearly waived that. And when he called his wife, there's sometimes where that could be privileged, but they both heard the tape that said it's not.
So none of it was admissible?
I thought the state was going to want to play hours and hours of it.
Yeah.
I thought they would want to play the movie that, Richard Gere was in. So the jury would understand this is what they're talking about.
Yeah.
They didn't introduce 1 minute of it, nor did they cross-examine him about any of it.
Dialogue Podcast is sponsored in part by She's Birdie. I love She's Birdie. What is She's Birdie? It's a personal alarm that is most importantly easy to use and effective. The alarm is loud and easy to activate when you need to, but impossible to activate accidentally. This is really important. It's also not a hard plastic. It has that kind of silicone, soft, velvety cover around it, so it doesn't slip and slide all over the place. It's got a nice grip in your hand. Not as important, but worth mentioning, they're really cute. The founders worked hard to design a product that you don't mind wearing on your handbag or gym bag or car keys. Each one comes with a beautiful brass ring, and the alarms themselves come in really fun colors, but also a dark charcoal, which reads as black, which is definitely the one I have. But right now they came out with new spring designs, including blue with little flowers, white with little strawberries, super adorable designs. And if all of that weren't enough, She's Birdie gives back every time you buy one. To date, they've given over $50,000 to local women's shelters and assist in changing legislation to protect victims of abuse and violence. Don't wait. Prepare yourself and the people you love with a She's Birdie personal alarm now. Dialogue listeners get 10% off when they use the code DIEHARD. Go to shesbirdie.com and use the code DIEHARD, DIEHARD, for 10% off at checkout. That 10% applies even on top of a sale. There's just no reason not to have a She's Birdie. Again, it's shesbirdie.com, code DIEHARD. Our new partner has a product that I cannot wait to start using. I just got back from traveling and I cannot wait to start taking athletic greens. I didn't eat well, I didn't rest well, and I am so ready to reset my system. I want better gut health, more energy, and what I'm really looking forward to is removing all these pills and vitamins from my daily routine and taking a supplement that actually tastes good. 1 scoop of athletic greens, you're absorbing 75 high-quality vitamins, minerals, whole food sourced superfoods, probiotics, and adaptogens. They help start your day right, and it's a special blend of ingredients that support your gut health, your nervous system, your immune system, your energy, recovery, focus, and aging. Literally all the things I want to improve. Now, there's a lot of reasons to love athletic greens. I'm excited because it's lifestyle friendly, so if you're vegetarian or vegan or keto or paleo, gluten-free, dairy-free, it's going to work for you. I'm most excited that it contains less than 1 gram of sugar. I hate products that are telling me they're healthy and are pumped up with sugar, which completely reverse all the healthy effects. Now, you might be wondering, is something like this really expensive? And I'm going to tell you, it is cheaper than your Starbucks order. I can guarantee that. It will cost you less than $3 a day to get everything I mentioned before. Now, it's time to reclaim your health and arm your immune system with convenient daily nutrition. It's just 1 scoop in a cup of water every day. That's it. No need for a million different pills and supplements to look out for your health. And to make it easy, Athletic Greens is going to give you a free 1-year supply of immune-supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. All you have to do is visit athleticgreens.com/emerging. Again, that's athleticgreens.com/emerging to take ownership of your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance. More time, athleticgreens.com/emerging, EMERGING. The link is also in the show notes. Also, that is a weird move. Mm-hmm. Have you ever had any follow-ups with that team and asked what their thinking was?
They're not really pleased with my critique.
Yeah,
so
sure.
So no, they're not. They're very sensitive, and I'm sorry. I don't want their feelings hurt. I really don't. They're both very, very, very nice guys. But the truth is what it is, and I'm not going to just not say it in a case this big. I've just got to be honest about what happened and what didn't happen.
Yeah.
There were sometimes people who criticized me because they thought, oh, she didn't let all this stuff in. Well, I couldn't have made them put that stuff into evidence if I had a gun to their head, Wow. I don't know why they didn't. I mean, to me, it was like, oh my God, this stuff is so powerful. If I'd been a prosecutor, I would have loved it. In the defense, we're like, oh my God, they were fighting it really, really hard. I ruled against them except for that tiny part where the lawyers were talking. State, I don't know why they wanted me to if they weren't going to use it.
Right. So you can only make the ruling. You can't force them to bring it in. That's telling them how to try the case, which you can't do.
Yeah, and that's the frustrating part is I couldn't make them put evidence on that I knew they had, and I couldn't make them object when the defense was doing things that they should have objected to.
I forget, was his first wife who went missing, Kathy Durst, was her story permitted into the trial?
There were some misunderstandings about that because I had granted a motion in limine, which says you can't bring it up without approaching the bench first, so that in case you blurt it out and you're not supposed to get it in, you can't unblurt something out. Yeah. So I had to rule you have to approach the bench first. A lot of people in the media thought what I said was you can't put it on at all. No, that's not the law. That's not the way it was. You can't. So because in the defense they were pushing the motion in limine so that the state didn't blurt anything out. Okay. And they were right. And so I granted it. And I fully expected the state to approach the bench. I fully expected all that to come out. But then the defense started bringing it up as part of their explanation for why he acted the way he did being on the run and being afraid of being exposed. They used that as an explanation, even though they weren't admitting to killing her, but they were admitting to a lot of bad acts to try to explain. The defense had the challenge of explaining incredibly, incredibly heinous behavior. The cutting the body up, besides killing somebody, the cutting the body up, that was a big, big, big hump for them to get over. And DeGuerin's got this saying that he teaches at law school, teaches at the University of Texas Law School, that if you're a defense attorney and you've got really bad stuff, kiss the ugly baby is what he calls it. And so embrace whatever is and be honest about it. Or I don't know, be honest about it, but kind of, embrace it and deal with it up front so that you've got to do something and it's better not to look like you're hiding it. So he kisses the ugly baby. But I also think, and I've watched him in a number of trials, he's really brilliant. I think sometimes he acts like he doesn't want something, or he does want something to get the state to get a different strategy. So they're kind of preparing for one set of trial strategy. Then he comes in and does something completely different.
Throws a curveball and they're scrambling to catch up. I mean, it was effective, it sounds like.
Yes. He's very, very, very good at it.
But and maybe this is why I'll never pick a jury trial, because if I'm a juror and I hear that he's got this missing wife from New York, and then this guy he killed, self-defense or not, it all starts creating a bigger picture that would be harder for me to separate the idea that maybe this guy did commit a murder and it wasn't self-defense. To me, that's not like a far leap to make. But the state didn't, I guess, could they not connect the dots that way?
The state didn't try to connect too many dots. The state said, okay, here's a dot, here's a dot, here's a dot. And they didn't really try to connect them, but, you can't find someone guilty because they did other bad stuff. But if there's a pattern of behavior that's considered to be someone's modus operandi, that, you know, is kind of their signature, or it shows a motive, or it shows intent, or it rebuts something they made up. You know, like how many times do you have to defend yourself in a murder case where someone, you know,
Right.
there's a law of too many coincidences for people to believe at some point.
Yes. And also a self-defense situation doesn't necessarily warrant a full decapitation and
Correct.
discarding a body, which is what happened to Morris Black. I did read that his head was never found. This is, you know,
That's
sensitive
correct.
Trigger warning. Could that have been a missing piece of the puzzle, so to speak, of evidence? And what happened? Do you think?
Well, the state did look for, I mean, the Galveston Police Department, they looked very, very hard. And of course, that's where the bullet hole would have been. And that would have shown the entrance and the exit wound. So if the head had been found, then that would have clearly rebutted his story or proved it, you know, either way. The fact that the head is not with everything else is a bit suspicious as well.
Yeah.
Kind of like, okay, if it was really self-defense, why is the head gone? That's kind of another kind of a weird factor.
Yes. And back to Kathy Durst, I know you can't say definitively, but do you suspect there was foul play and that he was involved and responsible?
I do. I mean, I've heard a lot of evidence. And then when I watched the trial in LA, I watched on television, watched many, many, many parts of it. And I learned more then than I already knew. Yes, I do think he killed her.
Yeah. When everything went down with Susan Berman, her murder and his trial there, I thought, we legitimately might have a serial killer on our hands. Like that, I'm not being salacious. This man, I think, killed these 3 people, which would put him in that category. So dangerous. Did you get that sense when that verdict came back? Did you wonder, did we just like let a man walk who is going to offend again?
Well, when I saw the pictures of Morris Black's body and I saw how neatly he was cut up, that was frightening because this is somebody who knew what he was doing.
Ugh.
I mean, he used different instruments for different parts of the body because you've got muscle and you've got bone and you've got ligaments and all that kind of stuff. So that scared me right there. Yes, he's a serial killer because he's killed 3 people and 3 is supposed to be what you qualifies as a series. But he's not like a serial killer like we normally think of as someone who's hunting for people or, you know, looking for opportunities to kill people. He kills because he has to. He kills to protect. You know, his pattern was killing witnesses who could testify against him. Now, I don't know if he killed Kathy on purpose. I think he killed Kathy. I think he hit her body. I think he lied about it. I don't know if it was an accident. I don't know if he was out of control. I don't know if he intentionally planned it. I don't know if it was spontaneous. That's uncertain right there. But I do think he killed her. Doesn't necessarily mean that he murdered her, but he killed her. Okay.
Yeah.
But then the other 2 people he killed because they could test. I think Morris Black was part of taking care of business. I think Morris Black he killed for the same reason he killed Susan Berman.
Between your trial and the trial for the murder of Susan Berman, his competency was questioned and his health and his frailty. By the time he was being tried for Susan Berman, I mean, he was actually not as old as he appeared. He seemed so frail and aged beyond his age, but he was older. How did he present when you saw him in the courtroom? And in terms of mental competency, was that a part of the trial? Did he get a psych evaluation? What do you remember of his countenance? And then were there psychological profiles at that time?
Well, that's an interesting question. My impression changed over time because I learned more things. In the beginning, you have to wonder, okay, you know, is this some crazy person who cut somebody up? I mean, you know, is some sociopath or psychotic person, whatever. So in the beginning, I didn't know. And then shortly before trial, he sent me a letter through not the lawyers that were representing him in my case, but a civil lawyer who was kind of running errands for him. And the letter was delivered to me the same time it was delivered to Court TV. And the letter was complaining of the Dream Team and saying that he needed new lawyers because he didn't trust them anymore. And he didn't trust them anymore because he'd given them millions of dollars, whatever the amount was. I don't remember exactly. And right before trial, they wanted a whole lot more because it was going to be harder than they thought. So his letter to me, which was very, very well reasoned, I'm not saying he was right, but it was very, very well reasoned. How can I trust these people with my life if they're trying to extort from me before the trial? Well, that's not a crazy, insane, incompetent person who says that.
Right.
So then during the course of that, he ended up working that out with them. Okay. But during the course of this too, I learned, and I don't remember, it wasn't in front of the jury, but the Durst Trust has a provision that if he's ever found insane or incompetent, he's cut off. I know, I learned it from the tapes. That's where it was. Because he and his wife were talking about it. About he can't use the insanity defense because that would cause him to be kicked out of the trust. And, in the beginning, some of the lawyers were trying to talk to him about that because they're there to save his life, not his money. Mm-hmm. And his wife's like, oh, no, we can't have that. This is a trick. You can't do that because then you'll lose the money. And so, and he's discussing this in a very reasoned way. So, and then I also heard in the tapes where he talks about he's going to pretend to be insane, like the movie. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so he had hired, I think, 3 very renowned psychiatrists as experts to help them with their case. But there was no official psych exam because they didn't want anything the state could share. They couldn't allow a finding in a courtroom that he was insane or incompetent. But they did what they did talk about in the tapes was because they couldn't do that. If he acted crazy in court and the newspapers reported on it and the TV reported on it, then they could imply that he was crazy and the jury would maybe let him off for that without officially finding that he's crazy. So they discussed, which is kind of similar to the Richard Gere movie, and so, in some ways was how do we look crazy without being crazy? So,
manipulative.
Right. And before I heard the tape that said that, where he said that, he had been acting crazy in court. Mm-hmm. He had been pretending to talk to invisible people at the counsel table. He was making pig noises and doing things like that to, especially if the lawyers were up at the bench and the media is just kind of sitting there kind of like hanging out. He would do things like that. But once he knew I heard the tapes, that stuff stopped.
Wow. It's very manipulative. Mm-hmm. It's very manipulative. He is an incredibly entitled person, and it does seem he was always worried about that money too. Mm-hmm. The fortune was of utmost importance. Yes. Is that a normal clause in a family trust to say, but if you're deemed crazy, you don't get the money? Because that sounds, I wonder why they put that in. That's
I
interesting.
I don't have a lot of experience in that field, so I don't know. It might have been specific or it might be just what they normally do.
Right. Yeah. I am curious about that. I'm going to find out. Now, the Jinx, we do see him in this documentary talking to himself, and that's what gets him into trouble. He's doing that same thing you're talking about, rehearsing, going over what he's about to say, but he doesn't know his mic is hot, right? And when he's in the bathroom, do you think that was manipulated and put on, or do you think that was him in his controlling brain, like obsessing over and trying to control the narrative?
I don't think he was faking that. I think that was I think he does talk to himself.
Yes.
But now in the courtroom, he appeared to be talking to imaginary people or whatever. But I do think that he does those weird little things. Yeah. And he got way too comfortable doing them on TV.
Yeah. Oh, it's so strange. Who reached out to you about the Jinx? Was it the director, Andrew Jarecki, or the team? Yes. And what did you think of that as a true crime story and a depiction of the whole saga? In
the beginning, I did not want to talk to Andrew Jarecki, and other witnesses were the same, because we knew that he had started off by talking to Robert Durst. And we had the impression that this was just some kind of vehicle to make Robert Durst look good. That was just a bunch of phony baloney. And so a lot of us like, oh, we're not going to indulge you in that. So he had to really try for months to get several of us to participate. And then finally he convinced me to go to dinner and just have a face-to-face instead of just on the phone and everything. And we did. And by the end of that, I was comfortable enough that this was not a project they were doing to just make a public relations thing for Bob Durst.
And not at all. And it ended up doing the very opposite. Right. I mean, it was instrumental in taking him down, which is fascinating. Now, what's wild and a great full circle to this conversation and meeting you is that we met at CrimeCon, and many of my listeners are familiar with what CrimeCon is. They're true crime enthusiasts. They go to this strange convention because we love these stories, but you are, such an insider with this experience in the actual criminal justice system. So what is it like to engage the genre of true crime through these stories like the Jinx, like all these podcasts out there, and understand, the inner workings of the system? Was that a difficult thing to reconcile, or was it quite easy and seamless to kind of go between the two?
It was easy and seamless. I love true crime anyway. I mean, I watch Law and Order. I've watched court TV, not when it's just about my cases. I mean, I think it's interesting. I grew up reading Nancy Drew. My mother loves Agatha Christie type stuff. So I've always been around that kind of stuff. And so, I've started to slow down a little bit, and I've got a lot of crazy stories and interesting true crime stories from being on the bench. Not just Durst, but that's one of them. But I've got a lot of, you live on an island, you have a lot of crazy stuff happen. Okay. So, and it's an island at the bottom of the country where people run to and they have nowhere else to go. So you get a lot of fascinating stuff. So I decided to start writing about a lot of it. Of course, I'm writing Durst about, that's one thing I'm writing about. I'm not finished, but then and some of it I'm doing as real true crime, and some of it I'm fictionalizing based on, kind of what the story's about. So I'm kind of going through a lot of my old stuff and kind of doing all that. I've been doing, then, I took a class that said you need to do market research. And so I started really kind of looking into the market out there, and which is fascinating. And I love it. So then I realized I had this CrimeCon, which I had fun there anyway. But I thought that's the best way to see what this market is, to go there and see 5,000 people who love this kind of stuff. I'm fascinated by it.
Before I let you go, I would love to get your answer to this question I ask my guests before they leave. You have such, like I said, a holistic 360 view of justice. How do you, in your own words, define justice?
Sometimes justice is letting the person go, and sometimes justice is punishing the person. I think it's about basic fairness and equity. One thing that fascinates me, there's a really great movie, Cool Hand Luke. Okay.
Oh.
Cool Hand Luke is Paul Newman, who's an escaped convict. And if you're watching that movie, you want him to get away. I mean, he's in prison. He's done bad stuff. But if you're watching that movie, you're not going to watch that movie and want Paul Newman to not get away. Okay. But in another case, you think, oh my God, Casey White. We can't let Casey White get away, okay? Because he's the bad guy. But what is it in that movie, Cool Hand Luke, that makes Cool Hand Luke the good guy for the same thing,
It must be a personal story that gives color to somebody so we see them beyond just the crime, right?
Yeah, right.
Well, thank you, Susan, so much for sharing a bit of your story and your amazing career and weird Bob Durst antics. We're very grateful. Thank you so much for killing the small talk.
Thank you for having me.
Dialogue is a Yellow Tape Media production, audio engineered by Jason Usry and produced, hosted, and edited by me, Rebecca Sebastian. If you love the podcast, please consider becoming a diehard by signing up at patreon.com/dialogue. Other ways to support the show, follow along on social media. We are at Dialogue Pod across platforms, and you can now watch most episodes on YouTube by subscribing to my channel, Rebecca Sebastian. For more information or to drop me a note, visit RebeccaSebastian.com. Until next time, thank you for listening and killing the small talk. Hey listeners, I want to tell you something that you might not know about me. I like reality TV. I might even say I love it. Not as much as true crime, but a lot. And I want to tell you about a podcast that I think you might like if you too sometimes want to escape into reality television. It's produced by People Magazine, and it's called People Every Day. It's hosted by their editor, Janine Rubenstein, and it's just a great, fun mix of popular celebrity culture and also some human interest stories mixed in with interviews, feature stories, and entertainment news. You're going to find episodes about unpacking Britney Spears' conservatorship, which, we've done here on Dialogue, culture scandals. I mean, you can't have a culture without cult, so already interested. And exclusive interviews with A-listers like Julianne Moore, The Rock, Chelsea Clinton, and many more. People Every Day is your daily dose of pop culture and what makes us human. You can listen to People Every Day wherever you get podcasts.